Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. I'm Lane Vitash, for those who don't know me, and I oversee the family ministry at Lincoln Park, and just as an adoption team that's led by Heather Dyer, who I don't think is popping on for good reason. She is in Ukraine right now. It's 4 a.m. there. We were joking earlier today that it would be a true test of her commitment if she popped on. I wouldn't be surprised if she did, but anyway, so we're just lifting her up in our prayers. But just as a team, we were just thinking about and praying about ways that we could continue to just put adoption in front of our body and equip and ignite hearts to care for vulnerable children. And Rafe and Sarah have not only walked an adoption journey themselves, but have really just shared the gospel message through this and really raised up a church to care for vulnerable children. So Rafe leads South Loop location, and Sarah oversees our adoption ministry that I think they both had a huge part in bringing to, or in the adoption fund, at Park. And both of them were a huge part in making that happen. So I will let Rafe and Sarah take it from here because they're the people we really want to hear from tonight. And we'll have time at the end for questions. But go ahead, Rafe, Sarah, all you.
Thank you. And you're abandoning me?
No, I was just turning off the bright light behind me.
Just so we do a good time check to make sure. This is scheduled till what time? Because I'm a preacher. I can go a long time if you don't keep me in check.
Yeah, so you're good to teach until like 8:45, and then you've got up until like hard stop at 9:15.
Okay, got it. Perfect.
With questions and stuff. Sound good?
Awesome. That's what we were kind of expecting a little bit. There's so much to talk about, so fitting it down into a short time is actually good for us. It helps us try to get to the most important pieces and give you a groundwork. So first of all, let me just start off this way. So glad that you guys are on this. This is a huge thing for Sarah and myself. Sarah will share a bit of our own journey in a little bit with adoption, but not only is adoption part of our own story, but what I hope to show you tonight is that adoption is so central to the Christian faith. We really cannot fully understand our own Christian inheritance, our own Christian faith, without fully understanding what adoption means. And because of that, because of our spiritual adoption to the family of God, practical adoption, like actual family, is like what we have on this phone call tonight, adopting children, is one of the best ways to reflect our Christian faith. It's kind of like when I do a wedding, and I always say how one of the metaphors that is used, well, it's not really a metaphor, but one of the pieces of language that's used in the scriptures to talk about the Christian faith is marriage, and that every earthly marriage, every Christian marriage points towards the greater marriage. In the same way, adoption is very similar. Another language that's used of our own Christian faith is adoption. So I want to just encourage you. Thank you for being here, wherever you are in your journey. We know very well there's many different legs in the journey. Some of you are just going to be checking this out. Some of you really, you're not anywhere close to adoption, but you just want to learn more. And that's a great place to be. I hope tonight for you guys that some seeds are planted that might bear fruit sometime in the future. And some of you are really strongly considering adoption, or maybe you're already on the journey a little bit, and this will be a chance to get some questions answered. Wherever you are, that's awesome. Don't feel like you need to rush the journey. Be a learner. I think that's a big thing we learned is you always want to hold this open. And honestly, what I like to challenge our church with is I believe that many are called to adoption. I don't think this is one of the things that's for the few in the Christian faith. I think because of how close it is and near to the actual Christian gospel, that many Christians should, and historically over the last 2,000 years of church history, have been called into adoption. So all that to say, this is something that's super close to our own heart for many reasons. I'm so glad you guys are on here. The true hero tonight is my wife. I'm not kidding, it's Jesus. Jesus is the real hero. But just below him, like right here, I'm kidding. You're really great. Just below him is my wife. And Sarah oversees the entire adoption fund. And so one of the things Sarah gets to do is she has conversations with many families across all of Park Community Church, all the locations, just helping navigate through all different types of stuff. So she really is a world of information. Tonight is really going to be her chance to share a bunch of stuff. I'm going to jump in on some of the Bible things in the midpoint, but with that as an introduction, my lovely wife, will you share a bit of our story?
Yeah, for us, adoption, I don't know, it was something that was always on the table. I felt like even before we knew we could or couldn't have kids, and just conversations that we had. And it took us a while to get pregnant with our first child, and she's the only baby that God has ever given us, I guess genetically. But even beyond that, we just felt adoption was something we needed to pursue as well. And just like you guys, we just started asking questions. And I think one thing with adoption is if you wait until you're ready, you'll never do it. And sometimes I still don't think we're ready, and we've already adopted 2 children. Like, they have our names and everything. It's a done deal. And so if you're waiting to feel like you're ready, that will never happen. For us, it was a bunch of little steps that turned into bigger ones. And so when Ruth was 2, we decided to step into, Rafe just put the notes up on there. I'm sorry, can you put that down?
Take it down? Yeah.
That's a little confusing to me. Okay. I'm not a teacher on the screen like Rafe is all the time. It's also weird too not being able to hear anybody. All right, anyway, I'll just look at your faces. When Ruth was 2, we decided to start the process of adoption, and we went to different adoption info sessions, and we had read, our big book for us was Adopted for Life by Russell Moore. And just after we read that and really saw God's heart about the gospel, we thought, well, we need to adopt. We need to do that. We started looking at infant adoption or international adoption, and the Lord, I feel like, kind of quickly turned our path towards foster care. And just really gave us a heart, realizing it's a practical way to love your city. We talk about at Park to be a church that impacts the community that you live in. And it was crazy for us to think that there were kids that needed homes just in our backyards that were here. And we found out later our daughters were born less than a mile from our house, which is crazy, right down the street. Mm-hmm. So we started taking classes with foster care, and during that process, our girls actually have a little brother who is in care at our church with another family. And she kind of said on a whim, she's like, hey, Asher has twin sisters who need a new foster placement. You should take them. So that way we keep the siblings at church together. And we're like, what, twins? We were not ready for year-old twins. But God had other plans. And the more that we thought and we prayed about it and learned a little bit of their story, we realized it was more important for them to have each other and to have somebody that looked like them in our home versus our comfort or ease of taking 1 child versus 2. So on February 16th, 2017, we met our little girls. They were 14-month-old twins. And about 9 months after that, also our journey in foster care through it with adoption went really fast. 9 months after that, their mom met with us and asked us to adopt her girls, that she was ready to sign over rights if we would adopt them. And that was a crazy conversation. We said yes. We were a little surprised how fast it went. And then 9 months after that, they became official Chenerys. And so we have 3 little girls. Oh, we also have a biological daughter, Ruth. She's 2 years older than them. Mm-hmm. So she was 3 when they joined our home, and they're 6 and 4 now. And
depending on the moment, all 3 of them are either best friends or worst enemies.
Just like sisters.
And I think what I hope you heard in that story is, in our journey of becoming adoptive parents, honestly, a couple things. One, she was pushing me along most of the way. I think the Lord really had her a step ahead of where I was at most of the turns in the journey. I felt like I was always open to adoption. Looking back, adoption is one of those things that's easy to be about. It's much harder to step into and take actual steps towards. And so when it came to actually going to a class and doing actually signing up and going to the classes and then making big decisions, I was always slow to drag my feet, but God had us in a partnership where we could really work together and pray through that. And so I think part of that for you guys, as you think about where you are, is just be listening to what the Spirit's doing in your own journey. What you learn along the way, take it in, pray about things, and God opens and closes doors. And any door that you ever go through in the name of Jesus Christ that's scary and risky is always going to be worth it on the other end. And so don't ever go through a door because it's scary. Have better reasoning than that. Let me walk through a little bit of some biblical background for you. I don't want to take too long on this, but I think this is really important, and I want to make sure that we think biblically, exegetically, drawing meaning from the text. That's what that word means, draw meaning from the text. And I don't want to do this in way of just kind of doing our due diligence of Bibling this thing. This is actually at the center of adoption for Christians. If any of you go on a journey where you end up adopting children, I want you to be able to think theologically about the significance of why you are doing this from the pages of Scripture. There's a bunch of passages that talk about this, and the two I want to draw most attention to, I put on your handout at the top. And it's Romans 8, 12 to 17, and Galatians 4, 4 to 7. So I'm going to read both of those to us and then just draw some ideas from it. Romans 8, 12 to 17. Now, first of all, Romans 8, if you don't know, and Joe Riccardi's not on this, which I'm sad about. Romans 8, you should know this, is your pastor's very favorite chapter in the whole Bible. I have heard him tell me that probably 7,000 times. So this is important. If you're an LP person, you got to know Joe Riccardi's favorite passage, Romans 8. Here we go. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we might also be glorified with him. Galatians 4, 4 to 7. But when the fullness of time had come, and it's in this passage is talking about our slavery underneath the law. And then it says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Notice that language that comes up. It comes up there and a few other times in Scripture, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Now, a couple things just to point out to this. This is getting at the heartbeat of the Christian faith. What is Christianity all about? Romans 8, one of the reasons it's considered one of the most important chapters in all the New Testament is because after 7 chapters are talking about our sin and our sinly inheritance from Adam and all the ways that we're trapped in sin and the inward struggle. That's Romans chapter 7. And then Paul cries out at the end of chapter 7, who will deliver me, right? Who will deliver me from this body of death? And then he turns to Romans 8. And we find the grace of Jesus Christ that delivers us out of our entrapment to sin. And it all is around adoption. You'll notice in there, he talks about language in Romans 8, where he says, for you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received the spirit of adoption of sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The contrast there is slavery to adoption. Slavery to adoption. That falls a little bit on deaf ears for us, but if you think contextually back to the first century where they were writing, a typical household, if you were to go to like a larger household, some of the household code passages in the New Testament, you think of like Ephesians 5, the passages that say, husbands, treat your wives this way. Wives, treat your husbands this way. Children, behave this way. Slaves, behave this way. In many households back in first century, the household was a bit more of an expanded household than what we know today. Underneath one roof or underneath one kind of home, I guess you would say, were legitimate children. Sometimes there might be aunts and uncles that lived there as well. And then oftentimes there were bondservants, servants of the house, or the word that is oftentimes used as slaves. And the relationship of a slave to his master is very different than the relationship of a child to his father. And that's what's getting after in those passages. When it says you don't fall back into fear, the slave always has this wondering of, is their master pleased with them? Have they done what the master ordered them to do in order to be in good standing with the master? Will the roof be available for them tomorrow if they fail too much or if they make enough mistakes? The child of the father never has to worry about that. He doesn't wake up in the morning wondering, man, is dad going to keep a roof over my head? That fear is gone. And he just gets to cry out, Abba, Father, Daddy, like, no matter how many times I, drop something heavy on your toe, you're still going to love me, right? That's the spirit of adoption of sons, of being a child of God. And so the slave, there's two things he lacks. Number one, instead of fatherly love, the slave has a true fear of their master, wondering if they've done their job. And secondly, they don't get any of the inheritance, right? Slaves didn't get the inheritance. But here in Romans, it says, wait, when you believed in Jesus Christ, though Jesus is the only true son, he's the one true son. He's the only one that deserved the inheritance. He's the only one that gets the righteousness that is rightfully his. Though you didn't earn any of it, God will adopt you into his family by placing your faith in Jesus Christ. Though you were not children, though you were far, and in fact, when you were enemies of God, says Scripture, then he adopted you into his family. And then you get all the rights that are Jesus's. You get his righteousness. He's the firstborn son. You didn't earn that, but yet he shares it with you through adoption. You get his inheritance. Think about that. The inheritance that is Christ's, he shares with you in all eternity as you get adopted into his family. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing to think about, but inheritance is actually a really important concept. We find throughout the book of Proverbs that it's a good and wonderful thing to store up an inheritance for your children. And if any of you are on that journey of trying to save up a little bit of money to one day leave an inheritance, you can imagine if you have a love for your child, right? And you want to be able to leave them in a good position. Now think about bringing in other people and you have to split that inheritance with them. There's a little bit of do I want to bring these outsiders into my family? And through adoption, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to love this outsider who didn't earn my love. And I'm going to love them as if they were my legitimate child. They're going to get full access. Everything that a legitimate child gets, they have access to. That's your adoption in Christ. When you place your faith in Jesus, you've been adopted into the family of God. What's more, it's not just that you were incapable of earning that love. It's actually that you were an enemy of God until you placed your faith in Jesus. So God didn't just adopt a little child who had no hope. He adopted one of his enemies and calls you a son and daughter. Now that should stir something inside of you, even when you think of the word adoption. The first move that you should make is kind of this worshipful adoration that you've been adopted. Isn't that amazing? You've been adopted in the family of God, and that should cause you first and foremost to rejoice in God. Now, I gave you these 8 kind of fill in the blanks. These are largely borrowed / stolen from John Piper. He wrote a wonderful article on adoption, and I put the link to it. I'm not trying to claim this as my own by any means. Some of the stuff he writes in there, I've read in other resources as well, and I just thought it was such a phenomenal resource because it shows the similarities between biblical adoption and earthly adoption. So let me just give you these fill in the blanks real quick. Number 1, adoption is costly. Adoption is costly, and if you're filling in the blanks, that's the first one. It cost the Father the death of his son, Jesus, on the cross to adopt you into his family. That was the cost to love you this way as a son and to give you an inheritance. And in earthly adoption, it's expensive. And we'll talk about that today. It's expensive, not just financially, but there's a cost. There's a cost that you pay to go through this. It's worth it, just as it was worth it for Jesus. Number 2, adoption involves the legal status of a child. The legal status of a child. Our Heavenly Father, when he adopted you, he changed your legal status. He gave you a new last name, so to speak. You are part of the family. You're no longer an enemy. You're considered a child, and your legal status is now justified before a holy God. Same thing when you adopt a child. Their legal status gets changed. Our 2 daughters, they actually got new birth certificates. And our names, where it says Dad, my name is written in there. Mom, Sarah's name is written in there. Adoption is blessed with the spirit of sonship. Very quickly, you get all the access of a legitimate child, of a firstborn child. You get the full love of a father, and you cry out, Abba, Father. That's the first century way of saying daddy, right? It's just that emotional, that very close thing. Number 4, adoption makes a child an heir. We talked about that. Our inheritance is in heaven because God adopted us into his family through Jesus Christ. And when you adopt a child, they don't become a second class member of your family. They're not kind of asterisked in your family. You adopt them. When you're grandparents one day, you're going to be grandparents to their kids. It's kind of a neat thing to think about. And you take them on as a child. Number 5, adoption is planned. God planned from before the foundation of the earth to send his son as a redemption for sin. He planned this out a long time ago to adopt you. He elected you. That's Ephesians 1. He chose you specifically to be in his family. In the same way, you plan this. You work towards it. It doesn't happen just by snapping your fingers. You take intentional steps to move towards adoption. Number 6, adoption rescues from terrible circumstances. Children who are in the foster care and who are orphans, either domestically or internationally, they're in tough circumstances. We've been in this long enough that we have seen stuff that makes us cry thinking about it. Thinking about our own twins and what they went through. I'm tearing up right now thinking about that. And so you are stepping into incredible brokenness and actually providing gospel hope for people. Just as God the Father saved you from your terrible circumstance. Remember, you were a slave to sin and you were on a one-way track to hell. And God rescued you out of that. It was by grace. Number 7, adoption means we suffer now and experience glory later. Hard way to say that, but this is what that means. Jesus had to go through some really hard stuff before he walked into his glory where we will share that glory with him. And in adoption and foster care, there's some really hard days, very hard days. This is not a walk in the park. The Christian faith is not a walk in the park. So if it's a walk in the park, something's probably not going fully right. However, there's tough stuff, but there's also glory on the other side. It's really wonderful all on the way, as well as in eternity. And number 8, adoption is a bold display of agape love, a bold display of agape love. If you want to show love to the watching world of what Christians are about, this is one of the most practical, clear ways you can do that. And throughout church history, that's exactly what Christians have done. They've been known for their willingness to step into this kind of brokenness. With that, Sarah's going to walk. That's a bit of Bible stuff for you guys. I think hopefully it provides a bit of foundation. Now, what Sarah's going to do is walk through a lot of the practicals. Like I said, we set up this adoption fund. And part of the fund is financially to help cover costs for people who wanted to adopt, because adoption is very expensive. And so that's available to everyone who's a member at Park. But also it's to be an on-ramp to explain it. Some of this stuff's kind of complicated, like how does it work? And Sarah's just really good at all this stuff. So she's going to walk you through a lot of the practicals about how adoption actually works and what kind of things you should be thinking about.
I do say it was good for my heart to hear the gospel reasoning of adoption. We had a hard week with our girls, and it's good to be reminded that there's an eternal glory on the other side of what seems hard on this side of the earth. One, I work with under Renew Chicago with the Adoption Fund, and the fund I feel like is almost part of the job. I feel like a lot of the job is meeting with people like you. And what's cool of all the campuses, LP has an amazing, look at you guys already. You guys have an amazing team, but it's also too just connecting different people along different campuses. Like if infertility is part of your story, we have people who walk through infertility and then adoption. If you're looking to do foster care, if you're single and you want to talk to someone who's single who's walked through this, we have a whole network of people over all the campuses. And so it's pretty cool. And you're welcome to email me to be connected in those ways. But also to the fund is there as well for members of Park. So that's just a little bit of my job. Underneath adoption, I feel like the most common question I get is just kind of explain it. Like, what are the big headers? Where do we begin? What do we do? There's 3 main avenues of adoption. I'm sure there's more, but most commonly the ones that we deal with the most are infant domestic adoption, where you become the parent right at birth, where birth mom chooses you. And that's its own long journey. They're all long journeys. They all have brokenness. If you're looking for the easy route of adoption, there is none. it's gospel work, and international adoption, where you step into the life of an orphan child who does not have a family, and then adopting through the foster care system, or even just becoming a foster parent is that's the avenue the Lord led us on. So what I'm going to do is just kind of break those down and kind of talk about just big pieces of each one. And maybe you can see where your heart is being led. Also with that, if you feel like adoption, you're not being called to adopt, love someone who is. They can use the support, and the people who supported us were just as important as the journey. We couldn't have done it without them. So the first one is infant domestic adoption. And I just watched a mom in my mom's group walk through this in, I guess it was right, she left right before COVID started. Her little girl was born in March. But you get matched with a pregnant mom. And I think what I'm learning through this process is that it's not just necessarily a 16-year-old teenager who's super healthy and, has this baby that she just can't take care of. It's a lot of broken situations with women. There's no necessarily clean path of adoption. Women who have, drugs or alcohol or cannot raise the child their own, or domestic abuse. Sometimes those women choose adoption for their child because they know that the state will take their child. And so often they choose it so they have a little bit more control or say of who can adopt the child. With infant domestic adoption, it's usually the most expensive option. It costs between $40,000 and $60,000. And that's just the reality, to make sure everything's in place, that can be done in a healthy way. The adoption fund is there to step into those gaps, to hopefully pay up to $20,000 towards it. If money is part of the issue, but it's expensive, and that's a reality. That's a cost of it. There's home studies and certifications. There's also, unfortunately, broken adoptions within that, where a mother chooses to parent. She has her baby and then chooses to parent. And so again, there's no done deal. One of the most beautiful things about infant domestic adoption is you're really providing a direct answer to abortion. The other option for these babies is most likely aborted if they are unwanted or they cannot raise them. That's another choice. And I just love that direct correlation of the two of those. Also too, within any adoption, whether in foster care or domestic or international adoption, you have to be prepared to kind of pray through, what are you willing to take? Are you willing to take on a special needs child or a different race, or mother that has had alcohol? Could it be a drug exposed baby? And these are all big things. And I know for us, we felt like awful people. Sometimes being like, I don't think we can take that on. I just want to let you know, don't feel bad about saying no to those things. God will be good. It is better for a child to be placed in a home that's prepared to take on those challenges than it is for the child to be placed in a home and then have to be moved later. And also too, God knows these hearts, and he's going to provide a home for these children too. So don't feel like you have to also be the savior of the world when you step into that.
Yeah, one of just a little background on that. So one of the things that happens when you start going down the journey is, at some point under all these routes, you have to sit down with someone in the system, and they'll ask these long list of questions like, would you be willing to take a baby with high special needs? Would you be willing to take a baby that has been sexually molested? Would you be willing to take a baby that has all these horrible things? And it's really a hard thing to answer these questions. For us, there were some things like, we had at the time, how old was Ruth? A 3-year-old daughter. And so there were just some risks we weren't going to take. We didn't want to bring in a child into the home that could potentially put her at risk of sexual abuse or something like that. And so you have to know what you're ready to say yes and no to. As you might not know all the answers, but you at some point you got to make those kind of decisions. And the best you can do is just pray and ask the Lord, and be gracious and generous with what the Lord's made you able to do.
Also too, with domestic infant adoption, you have the most information. I feel like, the mom's full medical history, you know a lot about the child. I know in our case, if we actually knew we adopted through foster care and you don't know any of that until after you adopt them or in the process, I think if we would have known all the information, we would have been a little scared. Where sometimes it's better just to go in blind, but you never know. The next one is international adoption. International adoption is usually a little bit less when it comes to money. It's around $40,000. It usually doesn't necessarily hit that $60,000. One thing with international adoption is each country has its own rules. Like, you have to be married for 3 years, or you can't have another child, or your youngest has to be 2, or you can't be on antidepressants. Like, each country is totally crazy in their restrictions of when you can adopt and how you can adopt. Also, too, it is rare to adopt an infant through international adoption just because of the timing of it all. But there is there's an amazing free resource at Loving Shepherds. It's called Loving Shepherds Ministry. You can Google it. But they have a totally free resource. They're a Christian organization that does not benefit from organizations if you choose them as your agency, but they will match you. They'll give you, basically you can say how long you've been married, or if you're single, or the ages or sex of the child that you're looking to adopt, and they will match you with agencies or countries that fit within your parameters, and they're always up to date on the guidelines for the countries. And so it's a good place to start if you're already looking to get matched with an agency. It's called Loving Shepherds Ministry. And the last one is foster care.
Do you want to mention about, never mind, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. The last one is foster care. And in foster care, most of the time the children do need to be adopted. A lot of the times children are not able to return home. And so I feel like stepping into foster care anyway, it's kind of something that your heart should be ready to do. For us, the foster care journey, we actually had some friends at Park who had started. They're like, Sarah and Rafe, if you're even thinking about foster care, just go take the classes. It's fascinating learning about your city and learning about the needs that are around you. And another thing about getting certified with foster care is you can get certified and never say yes to a child, but it's always, you can't say yes to a child unless you are certified. I remember hearing about these babies that needed homes and we weren't certified. I'm like, we'll take the baby.
And just so you know, 2 days ago, we got another picture, another text of, do you know anybody who can take a baby? Here's a snapshot of the cutest little baby that got removed from a home.
Yeah.
And
they couldn't find a family to place him with. Like they picked him up from the hospital.
And so we need, across Park Community Church, we need more families who are certified foster parents for immediate placement, who are just ready. And maybe it's not like I'm taking this baby and adopting it, but maybe it's I'm taking this baby for 2 months. And because, the child got removed from a dangerous situation, we're praying for the mom to get her back. But we get regular texts from our old agency saying, do you know anybody who will take this child? And oftentimes we have to say no, because there's just not enough people certified at this moment. And I want to be the church in the city of Chicago that never has to say no to that question. That's what I hope our church can be. But the only way to do that is to have a bunch of people that are certified. And we just have a list that we can just call at 10 o'clock on a night and say, hey, can you take a kid tonight? And as Christians, we just say yes. So we're working towards that. I think just even this phone call tonight's a solid step in that direction.
Another thing about foster care, this was huge for me. It is a totally free option. The state provides everything for you. It's free to take the classes. Your home studies are free. You also get a monthly stipend. It's $425 a month. If you're planning on using it as your income, it's not enough to live off of, but very helpful when it comes to day-to-day things. Also, daycare is provided up until the age of 3. And so if you are single looking to step into an avenue of foster care or adoption, we have 2 single foster moms at our church who have done it and done it really well with an amazing support system. It's not easy, but they've done it. But because the state helps, or the state pays for childcare, they're able to still work and their boys have been taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
Also too, the adoption is totally covered, like our legal fees, and they get a health care card until they're 18, even after adoption. And also all therapies, and any sort of services they can need even after adoption are covered. We've used those for one of our daughters. We've done therapies with her, and it's just nice to know that you can go and use the resources and not be worried about how much it's going to cost. So that has, I feel like that's just an extra thing to know that was helpful for us to know. You also can just foster. You can say, we're here to be a temporary place for a family or for a child. There's never any pressure to adopt, but I feel like it's good to be open to it after you've known a child for a while. Another huge thing about foster care is through the process. Ours was really quick. From when we met the girls to we adopted them, 1.5 years is like lightning speed. Most people told us it'd take about 4 years, and we just had a friend over 2 nights ago, and it took them 5 years to adopt their little girl. And it can be messy. Foster care is not really for the faint of heart. We had a great organization. Volunteers of America was our organization. They were incredible. But you can walk through it and just have bad caseworkers, and you're kind of at the mercy of the state, and there's different rules and things, and you kind of have to be a little bit go with the flow. But another very important thing about foster care is you have to be pro-mom, pro-birth family. It's her baby, and I couldn't imagine being knocked off my feet and the fear of somebody claiming my kids as hers if I'm trying to get my life together. And so it's that mix of, you have to fully love these kids as your own, like discipline them, love them, do all the really hard stuff, but also at the same time, you have to really hold it at open hands and be praying for the health and the healing of their biological family. And so it's like you have to fully love, you have to fully be there. And people say all the time, like, how could you do it? How could you love and have them ripped away from you? And I just have to keep thinking of our daughters, to know that if they left our home after 2 years of being here, to know that for those 2 years they had a stable, loving family, that it was safe, all their needs were taken care of, they were loved and tickled and put to bed. How healing that must be for them, that yes, children will leave, and yes, you can be brokenhearted, but it's more important for that child to experience a stable home for a season of time.
Even just for them to be in a home where the Holy Spirit is present.
Yeah.
And
being prayed over every night.
Powerful impact in a child's life.
Yeah. And then the last one we're going to talk about is Safe Families. And Safe Families is a step before a child enters foster care. It's an organization that I think they're in Evanston. They're out that way. But you sign up to be a short-term placement for a family. It might be 3 weeks, it might be 2 months. But you sign up to say, hey, we'll take a kid to help a mom get back on her feet. Maybe she's looking for a job. Maybe she has some interviews coming up. Maybe she has some health issues and doesn't have family to step in and take care of her children. With Safe Families, you do it all in your own resources. So if you have taken a child, you're either staying home with them or sending them to daycare, food and things like that, you're responsible for. There's no stipend. But there's a lot of resources here at our church too, and maybe you are in a financial position to be able to do that. It's not like it's an expensive thing, but you just treat this kid as your own, whether you have kids or not. So that's kind of those are kind of like the big headings. I feel like we're doing good on time.
We did good. Let me close just a couple things. This is an important topic that's related to this, and I want to tell a little bit of a story. It'll take just a few minutes, but in the first century, there was a horrible practice that was part of Roman culture at the time. It was called infant exposure, and it was a first century form of abortion. Basically, what infant exposure was if you gave birth to a child that you didn't want, you could just leave the child out in the trash heap after it was born. And the child would lay there and just slowly over a period of days die. it had become somewhat normal. If you read the Greek philosophical schools of infant exposure, some of the different schools of Greek thought really abhorred the practice, like lamented that it was part of Greek and Roman tradition. And some of them basically didn't really think much about it. They just said, yeah, I mean, they didn't really think much about it at all. They kind of almost said it was totally okay and just passed over it. When the church came along, within a very short period of time, infant exposure just ended in Greek and Roman society. And the reason for that was because the early church had such a high value of adoption, because that's what their own Christian story was. They had been adopted. That Christian families walking through the streets of these Roman cities, if they saw a child laying there, they would just pick it up and they would take it home and adopt it. They just said, not on our watch. We're not going to allow that to happen on our watch. Mm-hmm. And they adopted all of them until there were no more left. And what happened was the rest of the world looked in on what they naturally, because every person is made of the image of God and has some kind of a conscience inside of them, what everyone knew was necessarily evil, leaving a child out to die. They saw Christians stepping into that brokenness and loving radically and opening their family, like the thing that we keep most private and personal, bringing these broken situations in and adopting them and raising them as their own. And there's just the records of the Roman citizens of the time saying, they love our people better than we love our people. And they hated the Christians, but they couldn't get over the fact that they were loving their people better than Christians were. And so to draw a comparison to our day and age, abortion is a major, major thing in our culture today. It's a horror that it goes on the way it does. Mm-hmm. And we need, as a church, to speak very strongly against abortion. We need to say with total clarity, the Bible is against this, okay, and let's fight to get laws changed, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, we need to show what the other side of this is, that when there's brokenness and when there's children that people don't know what to do with, Christians are going to step in and care. And we changed the world once with adoption, and I really believe we can do it again. I think that's a big part of what God's called us to in this part of America's history. And so I share that. That's not just a personal point of passion for me. I hope it's a personal point of passion for the church in the days we're living in. But with all of that, that's kind of what we have planned for you guys tonight. We're so grateful that you're here. I bet there's a bunch of questions. And so Lane, I don't know how you want to do questions, if it's just kind of use the raise your hand feature or text them in, but maybe you could act as a moderator perhaps.
Yep, that sounds great. Yeah, either you can put them in the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask away.
Rafe and Sarah, this is Mike. Did your parents and your family think you guys were absolutely nuts to do this?
That's a good
Whose parents? We got very different parents over here, Mike.
Oh, I did.
What kind of support system did you guys have? Were you getting encouraged, or did you do this in spite or because of the world around you?
That is an important thing. Both of our families said we'll love them like our own. Like if you adopt them, like we'll treat them the same. We'll love them. But I know for us, we had a biological daughter who we knew and loved, and she was very predictable and easy. And when the twins came, it kind of at the beginning felt like a long-term babysitting gig. At the beginning, there wasn't that initial, like, you're our daughter, like you're trying to love them. And I realized if I felt like that, my parents probably felt the same way. And I remember the first time I took the girls home, they were so excited to meet them. And then you could tell they just had some guards up. And if you know my parents, they're so loving, they're so great. But it took them a while to really love them. And like, so they'll make comments sometimes. I remember Ray's mom has said, comments at the beginning where they don't realize what they're saying. Like, oh, I spent the day with my only granddaughters. And we're like, well, you do have 2 biological, but you have 2 adopted. Like, you have 4 granddaughters. You didn't spend the day with all of them. But that being said, 3 years in now, there's no difference. Like, they really have loved them and support you. So I just want to say that being careful, even if your parents say they're going to, like, we're all in, I hope that they are, but also give them grace and time to adjust to the new, I feel like the new normal is kind of with it.
I think the other thing for us too is the twins we adopted are African American, and we're
Right.
Caucasian, and so in terms of all the conversation that's happening in our culture right now, not always, but many times adoption is it oftentimes is you end up with a mixed race family, and I think oftentimes for everybody, I mean, for us in that journey of becoming a mixed race family, man, I mean, everyone's got so much to learn in this conversation. Everyone's on a learning journey, but it's the fascinating journey going on it yourself, but then bringing your family on that journey too. Bringing your uncles and your aunts and your parents and your
cousins,
brothers and
yeah.
sisters and bringing them all on a journey. It's really a practical way to speak into the current cultural issue, but also you take people on a journey with you and you love them through all their hard questions and all the questions where they don't realize they just put their foot in their mouth, and you're like, it's okay. Like, we're going to give grace and we're going to all learn together. And so there's that piece of it as well, oftentimes, that we've just been on the journey on.
Hey guys, I don't know if I know the answer to this. Why is, maybe you don't need that, that's okay. But like, why is adoption expensive and foster care less expensive? Like, I guess I'm like, what does $40,000 or $60,000
Like crazy.
go toward? I'm just ignorant. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, there's legal fees. Like, I'm actually reading a book right now based on a true story of a little boy who was kidnapped in India in the 80s. And then, he was at a Christian orphanage and sent to America. And the whole time he's like, I have a family. Like, I've been kidnapped. And so
there are legal guards up now to not let that happen anymore.
Let that happen.
That used to happen.
But that's part of the reason too. There's all these there's fees, there's, they're paying for the social workers, the background checks, the flights. Also too, with infant adoption, depending on, when I was walking through it with our good friends here in the South Loop, depending on your adoption, different women might ask for different medical care. You might be responsible for all their medical care that you sign up, or paying for their housing. And so what they did is they had a cap. I think their cap was $50,000, and they're like, we had to say no to adoptions if they were going to be more than 50,000, or if the mom didn't have insurance or didn't take the state's insurance. They're like, we can't be able to fund that. And so that's part of it too, is just there's physical needs that you cover, but within the state, you're solving a problem. These are kids that they've been neglected, or they're in danger and been removed from their homes, and they need you. Like, the state of Illinois needs loving, safe families for these kids to go to. Otherwise they can't, like, there's nothing else for them to do. And so there's an incentive, like, that's why they incentivize, I feel like. And also too, that's why you don't lose your stipend. Like, we still get a stipend for our girls until they're 18. And I think that's to incentivize adoption and permanency for that child. Because there's plenty of people who would say, as silly as it is, if I lose that $400 a month, I'm not going to adopt them. I'm just going to be a guardian or never make this official for them. And so to me, I think that's, the state needs you.
In the eyes of the state, it's all math. So in the eyes of the state, it's cheaper for them to pay $400 a month to a parent, to be a foster parent who adopts, than it is to see that child all the way through the foster care system, through the orphan care system in Chicago. That cost to the state of what that child will end up, the difficulties that child will go through in their life, intertwined with the state and the state's responsibilities, will far, far outweigh paying a loving family a $400 a month stipend to be a parent to the child. And so that's one of the reasons they pay for orphan care, for foster care.
Kids who aren't adopted out of the foster care system, it's something crazy, the percentage of them more likely to be incarcerated if they're not adopted, and just what a family can do for those kids. It saves them money. That's all they're thinking about, is like, it's cheaper to pay them. Yeah.
I guess I always found it weird to be like, okay, I'm willing to step in to adopt a kid, like child, infant adoption.
Yeah.
but I'm going to pay you $40,000 to
Yeah.
adopt it. But it makes sense of like legal costs and you know, the mother's costs and things like that. That makes sense. Thank you.
No problem.
Rafe and Sarah, I'm curious, just as we have a lot of families or people that are stepping into adoption, foster care, safe families, things like that, what are some really like tangible ways that our body can come alongside them and support them through the process?
One, I know that there is a natural, I'd say, connect with other adoptive families. Like if you are an adoptive parent, you'll quickly find out that you have this instant bond with other families that have adopted. I don't know why, but there is. It's something big that you walk through together and you end up talking about therapies or caseworkers or wherever you end up doing. So that community is really special. So I'd say seek that out. If you are, we can help you connect you with people. But also too, I would just say, and keep on asking questions. Ask them about their journey, how they're doing. It may be something that's lying dormant in their heart, or maybe something that they're actively pursuing. Also too, if it's foster care, it can just be a lot. Like just like when somebody has a new baby, meal plans or physical needs. The other thing, if you get a child through foster care, you have no idea what age they are, what clothes they might need, or whatever. I know when our friend got our girl's little brother, she didn't have a car seat, and he showed up, at 9:00 at night in a onesie in October with one sock on. Like he didn't have a car seat or anything. Within 24 hours, our church had given them a car seat and clothes and anything else that a stroller, like just anything to keep that moving. So I'd say there's practical needs, but also to just emotional, like praying with them. It's a big deal. We also just want to say to all of you who are on this, like, it's a big deal that I remember the first time we went to an adoption thing, we felt like we were like breaking the news to our parents, like we were pregnant or something, like we're going to our first adoption meeting. Like maybe it's not like that for you, but it's a big deal that you guys are here and learning, or whether you just want to support either. Yeah, I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, what we hope to do, and I think what's happening at each of the locations in different ways, is that there's such a culture of foster care and adoption within the church that it becomes a somewhat normal point of conversation. Mm-hmm. And the more you just love on people who are in the process or in the journey, the more you learn from them and listen to them and allow them to share their stories at Park Lincoln Park, the more it slowly catches on. And I think you really give those families a chance to kind of share some of their heart and what they're going through. And so if you're looking for a way to support families that are going through it, just honestly, it's simple, but just be a good Christian family. Like call them, love them, give them a night off. There is hard stuff. Show up, be in their life. It's all the simple stuff that we do that, frankly, Lincoln Park, you guys are like the best at. And so just do that really well. And that goes a long way, but just make sure to keep it in the front of the conversation. This is one of those things that we found it's easy to get kind of raw excited about it for like 3 months. And then it kind of falls off, and it kind of goes to the back burner a little bit. Meanwhile, there's like 2 or 3 families that's like, whoa, we just like jumped in the deep end of the pool here. Like don't fall off. So make sure you just keep loving people who are in the process and don't let the steam fade off.
Hi guys, this is Grace. I have a quick question for y'all. So, especially over the last couple of months, I have felt like race is very much a prominent topic of discussion. And you mentioned that a lot of families that step into foster care or adoption will have interracial families. So, what has that journey looked like for you guys leading up to stepping into foster care? Were there ways that you were preparing to care for children who were not white? And also, what has been important to you guys post adoption to make sure that that is a valuable conversation that your kids are having, or that you're having with your kids?
Why don't you go first?
One, I'd say community. We do our very best to make sure our girls have people that look like them. We're intentional about where they go to school, who their teachers are, what our home looks like, who's around our dinner table. Also too, the Black women in my life have just been a total invaluable tool. My friend Keisha, who was over the other night, when the girls were just a couple months old, or been in our home a couple months, she spent 4 hours with me teaching me how to do their hair. And while she was teaching me how to do her hair, she was able to speak things I'd never heard before, just different stories and things about being a Black woman in the city of Chicago. She lived in the West Loop at the time, and different racial things that had happened to her that just opened my eyes so much. And I know for us, we had no idea what having 2 Black daughters would do to love our community. It was also Keisha who said, she's like, we came to your church just to check it out, but she's like, we stayed. She's like, because she's like, I knew if Rafe loved his daughters, he was going to love me and understand me. And so it's just been really sweet how I feel like you get to know people that don't look like you in a much easier way. Also too, there's negatives to that. There's people that judge you, like how dare you? There's a negative aspect to that as well. But probably one of our favorites is just how our daughter Ruth, they're her sisters. Like with these race conversations and everything on Facebook of how to raise your kids being anti-racist kids, I'm like, well, the best thing we can do is they're her sisters. Like she loves them and like knows them and everything about that, and her little friend group and everything too. And so I think it's just been a beautiful thing of how when it becomes your family, also too, like the news stories become real. It's not just somebody else or somebody else's problems. It's now our daughters. This could happen to them. We want to make change now, so their future is better too. It becomes personal because they're ours. They're our girls.
Yeah, and I would add to that a couple things. I think the more you, and this goes whether you're talking about foster care, adoption care, or just frankly speaking into the conversations on race. And I don't mean to jump into a whole can of worms right now, but that has to be something more than just what you read about, right? Mm-hmm. Like it has to be more than reading a book. It has to be more than reading a blog or listening to a podcast. Like, especially as people living in the city where you have such opportunity for diversity of relationships, your life really has to, you kind of have to live it. And so the more you intentionally diversify your relationships, and it's not just black, white, that's just diversity of perspectives and opinions and across the board, it creates a very beautiful way of going through life, a very biblical way. And I think the opportunities are there for that in the city. Sometimes it's easy if you're not intentional with that to suddenly find yourself surrounded by a whole bunch of people that look and think just like you. But for us, it's a whole bunch of little stuff too now, like things like what baby dolls we buy. And these are things that most African-American families in the city or non-white families, frankly, these are questions they have to answer every day. Like, where am I going to get princess movies of princesses that look like my kids? Where am I going to get storybooks of kids that look like my kids? Where am I going to get magazines that show imagery of what beauty is that's not the whatever kind of Barbie looking person? And so these are questions that are kind of out of sight, out of mind, but got put in sight, in mind when we brought children Black children into our home. And we just had to start thinking about it. So even, you can probably see the picture behind our wall is just of an African-American child doing the hula hoop, like just stuff like that, where you'll have to end up slowly diversifying. And we've just learned a lot. Honestly, I feel like the number one thing I know on this conversation is that I really don't know all that much, as much as I've tried to give the better part of the last 10 years of my life to this conversation. I still feel like I'm a rookie learning everything each day. And so you just really have to have open hands and be willing to learn from a whole bunch of people who have very different perspectives than you. And the other thing with that too is particularly, well, I don't want to say particularly, I can only speak for the African-American journey with our children, what we've learned from good friends who are African-American. That part of their identity will be very important to them as they get older. Right now, they're beginning to recognize it, and we get hard questions from our daughters. And sometimes we're really stunned by the questions we get. Like a while ago, I was putting Joy into her car seat, and my 4-year-old looked up at me and said, oh, this is hard to say. She said, Daddy, will I have beautiful skin like Ruthie? That's our 6-year-old. Will I have beautiful skin like Ruthie when I get older? It's like, where did you even get that? What kind of question is that? Like, where did that start forming? But that's a real thing. And
but then I say that too, I shared that story with her preschool teacher, who's her dad is from South Africa, and I shared that with her, and she just wrote me later, and she was like, there's a book called Soulway about a little Black girl who wished she had lighter skin, and she's like, I really want to buy that book for Joy. And she, not only did she buy it, but during the midst of everything, she drove to our house, brought it here, wrote a note in it, and just, Joy now just treasures this book. She wants to read it all the time. So that being said too, is like, we work very hard and are very intentional about our lives, and where they go to school, that, okay, this happened, but what can we do to step into that? And so thankful for our community around us that helps us walk those lines too.
yeah, and then just to finish the thought is, we know as they get older, as they become teenagers, and there's a whole world of conversations that we don't even know about yet, that we've only been told stories about. And so you're just stepping into it, right? I mean, that's the reality, and you have to be a learner. And whether or not you adopt, I think we should all be learning on this stuff. That's just good gospel work at this point in life.
Thank you both for sharing.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. What would you recommend as like first steps for someone like me who's single and who is like just interested and like at the very beginning stages of like, I've always just felt like a heart for adoption, and that maybe that's like going to be my path, but very early and like don't even know if I have anything that I need, like next steps as far as just like where to begin, whether it's learning or partnering with the park organization or anything like that.
One, I would say, I don't know if foster care or anything is at all part of your heart or your avenue in that. But one thing about, if you're like, okay, practical steps, you can go through the foster classes. Most of them, I think they're all like online now. And once you're certified, you can be certified for 4 years before you have to renew any of that. So that's just kind of that's something, if you even just want to become a certified foster parent, can you type Volunteers of America in the little chat thing while I'm talking? This organization has been awesome here in, it's actually located in the South Loop, but they certify all over the city. But another thing too is just reading, seeing like where your heart is, or talking with others, especially either adopting or doing foster care as a single it's a huge life-altering change. And if you would like to talk to, we have 2 women just at our church who have done it and have done it really well. One just fostered, and then there was another family who used to go to our church, goes to a different church now, who they're now in the process of adopting this little boy. So she like got to raise him and then pass him off to a family she really loves in our church. And then the other one is adopting our girls' brothers, actually. But if you would like to be connected with her, or just say, what's your experience? Where did you begin? Like, what wisdom would you have for me as a single woman stepping into this? And also too, the support through foster care, I feel like it makes it more doable as a single person. If you make millions and paying for childcare is not that big of a deal, awesome. Like, do whatever route you want to go in. But I feel like it makes it a more doable thing to do too.
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 sides to that. And I think it is important to realize being a single parent's tough. And I want to make sure we say that we have some beautiful stories of single women who have fostered and adopted, and they have really done a wonderful job. And I would say they're wonderful success stories of that. And they really have had, and they have leaned in on the church heavily.
Mhm.
Honestly, if you don't have a strong community as a single woman, I would probably work on developing that before taking the step of becoming a foster parent. There's also stories at Park of single women who went into it
Yeah.
and totally got burned out and like had to kind of end the process, because the reality is single parenting is very difficult. And that's not to say don't do it. It's just I want to make sure you understand that that's a big commitment. We've watched people go through it and the challenges they go through, and they're amazing. They're doing a great job, but it's a heavy lift. And so, yeah, go into that prayer field and make sure you have really amazing community. And Park, if you know singles in your community who are stepping into that, love them and just keep loving and being available. They probably need more help than you realize they do.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good
Yep.
advice.
Can you talk a little bit about open versus closed adoption?
Oh yeah, we have that in notes and we forgot about it. So it can go a lot of different ways. So closed adoption is, you know, bio mom has no contact from here on out of like where their child's been placed, and I don't think you have any, well, you might have access to some of her records, but there's no other conversation beyond once they're adopted. I feel like the trend now is more open adoptions. And there's a woman in our small group whose sister had a baby at 19, and she has an open adoption with her. I think he's like 15 now. And it's a beautiful open adoption where they have a relationship and she's healthy and he's with a healthy family, and it's like best case scenario and it can go like really well. But I know for us, our girl's mom didn't say she wanted any sort of contact. No.
We were split on this decision
Yeah.
throughout most of the process.
Because to
I
me,
was
I'm
leaning
like, I'm a
towards
mom.
closed.
Like, I'm a mom. Like, I don't know. It's like, I would always want to know like where my kids are and how they're doing. But also too, our girl's mom is not in a healthy position. And I know for us, we kind of needed, for my heart, especially doing it through the foster care route, we needed to cement kind of like, this is our family. I am her mom. Like, they are just as much my daughters as Ruth is my daughter. I know a big moment for me is our girls learned to swim at 2.5. And I remember just being amazed by it. And I took a video of it and I wanted to send it to the caseworker to send to their mom. And it was right after we adopted them. And I remember I stopped myself. I'm like, wait, this is my joy right now. Like, I'm their mom. I just need to enjoy this. Like, of all the hard that I signed up for, I also got to sign up to get a front row seat to these little girls. And some people might think I'm an awful person. I feel like for feeling that way, but for me in my heart, I needed to let them just be mine and help that bond help form in my heart. But I think we're at the place now, maybe not. Our girl's mom is never a surprise to them. We have a picture of her on our fridge. We talk about her as first mommy and I'm forever mommy. I think that conversation even came up this day, how they are brown like her and they grow in her belly. And I know we never want her to be a surprise or have them feel like they need to sneak out to like find her when they're 18, if that's something they want to do. And we feel like they're in a healthy spot to meet her. I know I would love to take them to go meet her and see her and have that. But as of now, just with her not being stable, she's not a part of our girls' life, more just to protect our girls right now. I would hate for her to say, I'm going to meet you at the park and I'm going to bring you a pony, and them getting excited about it and then showing up and she's not there. There's no pony. Like, that was an extreme example, but I feel like each situation is different. Where our friends who just did infant adoption, they do have an open adoption with her, only she's, a couple states away. And so far it's been a healthy thing. I've also seen it go really bad with other friends too. And so I feel like each case is different, and finding that balance. Sometimes I feel awful about it, but I know for us in our situation, she wasn't healthy to be able to do that. So
In the book we recommended earlier by Russell Moore is called Adopted for Life. He recommends a closed adoption in that book. And his case is biblically, if you're drawing adoption from our adoption to God's family, we don't have open relationships with our former father, the devil. Now that's actually the point he makes in the book. And so he argues pretty strongly for a closed adoption. I don't think that's a fair, I think that's an overly harsh exegetical jump to make. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't necessarily teach that as the way you should do it. However, for me, honestly, I did want to lean heavily on a closed adoption the whole way through. And not because I don't want them to have a relationship with the mom at some point. I don't want to keep her a secret by any means. But I did want the kids to know this is their family. There's not these other people that are kind of involved or something like that. They've been adopted fully into this family. I'm their dad. This is their mom. This is their sister. And we need to start something new. Now, some people disagree with that. I tend to lean a little bit more heavily with Russell Moore on his point of it. It's not wrong or right to disagree or anything like that. You need to pray and ask the Lord when you get into that situation. And like Sarah said, different biological moms will be dealing with different things. Mm-hmm. There might be heavy mental illness. There might be heavy history of abuse, all that kind of stuff. And you need to take that into your consideration as you're praying over your new children. So.
Rafe and Sarah, you may not be able to hear me. Maybe someone can chat.
We can hear you.
We can.
You're frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, good. Hopefully it's an okay look for me.
It
frozen.
Is. Oh, no, now you're on frozen. There you
go. Okay, our internet keeps kind of cutting out, but we do want to honor your time and everybody's time. And I will add, before I can close this in prayer, if Rafe or Sarah, you want to, that is great too. We did a couple rounds of Adopted for Life right when COVID started, and we did them virtually, and there are a few more people that are interested in doing a book club with that. So if you are interested, and I know Lindsay, that would be a great just next step out of this, to just read and be in community and discuss adoption further. You can email us, Heather Dyer and I respond to that LP adoption at Park Community Church. And we have just a great adoption ministry at LP, like Grace Evans, who asked a question a minute ago. She's a CASA volunteer, and that's a really great way to advocate for children in foster care. So there's just a lot of ways to get involved, and we are just here to support and encourage you. And Rafe and Sarah, thank you so much. I know you guys have just inspired us in our story. And I know as you guys talked about the say yes, that was Sarah, when I met with you, that I came home with Shane. I was like, we have to get ready to say yes. And it means we can say no, but that was really, really encouraging for us to hear that. And we're thankful that that you spoke that truth to us. So, Rafe and Sarah, if you would type your emails in here too, but also we at the LP adoption, we can connect you guys if you have more questions with Rafe and Sarah too. And I can close this out, or Rafe, Sarah, I'll open it up if either of you want to do it too.
Okay.
What is it, pray?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I pray?
Yeah.
All right. Lord, I just want to thank you for these people. Lord, I just know one of the things that you just keep pressing on and on my heart is just one of your truths is just Psalm 139, Lord, that you knit life together in wombs, Lord. And before a day was even spoken, Lord, that you know all these children, just like you know us, Lord, and you know our stories and our lives and who you created us to be parents to. You're creating the lives of these babies. And I know on our daughters' lives, Lord, you called us to be their parents. You knit them together for Rafe and Sarah to be their parents, just like you're knitting babies and other children, Lord, just maybe to be children, Lord, to the people who are on the screen. Lord, may we be reminded that you are God over it all. Lord, in the brokenness and the hard stuff, Lord, you see it all. Keep encouraging just this team of people. Keep Satan far from them, Lord, and continue just to do your work in adoption. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Way to go, LP. Thanks for being on this tonight. Excited for what God's doing over there.
Thank you guys so much.
All right.